and religious group. The speaker is going to share his experience and fact about Tanzania's peaceful coexisting. He will also tell that coexisting is not entirely perfect either. Today's speaker, Hamisi Tindwa, is a doctoral student at Chonnam National University. Let's welcome our speaker with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I have been introduced, my names are Hamisi Tindwa, a Tanzanian, and therefore an African from East Africa. I was invited to give a small talk, which is a point for discussion today, on coexistence, and I would stress coexistence. There have been some quotes about cohabitation. That is rather technical, and I would talk about it if need be, sometimes in the future. But today let us discuss on the coexistence of Tanzania's diverse cultural and religious groups. And we'll take that to be a very nice example in Eastern Central Africa, a region that is well recognized to be characterized by inter-ethnic violence. So I want to enlighten all of us why Tanzania is so far spared from that kind of violence, while every single neighbor of it has gone through some of that difficult life experience. And well, now these are the questions that throughout the presentation we will be trying to answer. Very simply, where is Tanzania and how diverse are we calling the country is in terms of culture and religion? How did it overcome the coexistence barriers to set itself as an example out of that bigger region? And are there any shortfalls or challenges that we need to address to make it remain as a good example? And let us start by looking to a brief profile of it. Tanzania, as you would see there, is a country in East Africa, and this is the Indian Ocean. And it is bordered by about 9 different countries. And historically, it got its independence from Great Britain in 1961. This mainland part of Tanzania got independence in 1961, and the islands of Zanzibar and Pemba got their independence in 1963, followed a month later by a relatively bloody revolution called the Zanzibar Revolution, because the independence was unilaterally given to some form of people that were considered as puppets of the colonial power. And later, the two countries united to form Tanzania, which is officially called the United Republic of Tanzania, sometimes in 1964. Now, administratively, Zanzibar, the 2 islands and many other small islands there, would form a semi-autonomous part of Tanzania with their own government, legislative assembly, and the judiciary. And this semi-autonomous nature of that part of Tanzania would not touch what we call matters of the union. These will be dealt with in the union government. and examples are defense and foreign affairs. So although this government in Zanzibar would have a president and all other cabinet ministers, they would lack defense minister or foreign affairs minister. The country is divided currently into 30 administrative regions, 25 in the mainland and 5 in Zanzibar. The next question would be the cultural and religious diversity. Tanzania, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most culturally diverse countries in Eastern Central Africa. And it is home to about 120, and plus, of course, different ethnic groups. That is amazingly high. And the major ethnic groups, I tried to mention them there, and major in terms of their proportion of the entire population. And the largest group is called the Sukuma, somewhere there close to the Lake Victoria. The resolution is not very good, so those in the back may not see, but this is Lake Victoria and Sukuma are there. These form the largest group of about 13% of the total population. And each of the other that I have mentioned would constitute less than 5% of the total population. So you would see finally that out of 120 groups, the propensity would be to form less than 5% of the total population. So each ethnic group is relatively small in the entire country. Now, let us compare that to ethnic groups. In Kenya, we have about 70. Kenya is up here. And only 2 groups in some countries here in Burundi. And I mentioned those on a very nice purpose because we will discuss them a bit later. Now, each of these 120 ethnic groups has its own language, its social organization, very unique and different from the rest, and other cultural values that is making it very distinct. But the question will always remain, why has Tanzania resisted the pressure to flip over into these inter-ethnic violence? Despite the fact that we are seeing it is very diverse and the existence of different cultural and ethnic groups has been cited elsewhere to be the major factor, of course, for inter-ethnic violence. Now, in trying to answer that, the language effect is one. Ladies and gentlemen, we should remember that each and every country in Africa has been through colonialism. And during the colonial era, every country was forced, if I would call it so, to adopt the colonial master's language. And because that becomes either the second or even the third language that the citizens of that country would learn, it is not going to diffuse very easily into the society. And therefore, in most cases, very poorly spoken by the big chunk of the population, and therefore not the best language to use in communications in the deeper discussions under the small groups of the society. Now, we saw that in Tanzania. And because of that, we decided to have our own language that would be spoken best by every Tanzanian, because it has been there through history, only that it was needing a little force to put it into official forms and make it a national language. So Tanzania now, and it remains to be the only country in East Africa, in fact in Eastern Central Africa, to have its own national language. And that language is Swahili. It is, for that reason, the sole medium of instruction in primary schools in Tanzania. So everything that a kid from 6 to 13 would learn will be instructed in Swahili and nothing else. And officially it is a language for social and political spheres, while English, which is a language inherited from our last colonial master, because we had had a number of colonial masters in history, is left to be for higher education, international business, and high courts. It is for this reason that Swahili builds a nation into one people by neutralizing all inter-ethnic differences. Because if you have to communicate between Ngoni and Chaga, Swahili will be used because nothing else can keep them together. And because everybody knows it, it becomes easier. Now, the difference between that and the neighboring countries is we're not having such languages in those neighboring countries. Take Uganda, for example. I had a personal experience in there that we were having an agricultural extension program in Uganda, and for us to communicate to the farmers, we had to move from one region to another, but as we move from a region to another, we have to change the interpreters. This region talks its own language, and that language is not understood in the next region, within the same country. It is difficult, and because most of the farmers have not been through the formal education system, and therefore they may not be very fluent in English, which is a second official language in Uganda. So such problems, we think, may have given Tanzania a competitive advantage into avoiding inter-ethnic violence. The next that is unique to Tanzania is the policy of development villages. I have seen and heard a program similar to that in Korea, but we had it way back in the 70s. Prior to independence, over 90% of Tanzanian population lived in the countryside and of course in extremely scattered home states. But villagerization schemes implemented in the 70s and 80s brought people together, building intimate relationships as one society. We had to bring those people together. Those in power those days, I was not even born by this time, around the 70s. But they had to bring these people together into a very well-managed program so that these people, previously not related to one another, not known to one another, be brought into villages under the flagship of development villages. And this went hand in hand with the expansion of social services, education, transport, water and health services in particular. These services could not be provided by the state in these previously scattered hamlets. But the final effect would be intimate relations are built between various ethnic groups because you bring together people who are ethnically not related into a single village. And it was very organized purposely for that. So as a result, this is what we get. People come to know each other. They reduce the enmity that is characterized by people who don't know each other very well. Ladies and gentlemen, a third point would be policies advocating racial and religious tolerance. We have had this policy in Tanzania, and it is credited to the founding father of the nation called Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who advocated for interracial and interreligious tolerance among citizens. And for that reason, the national motto in independence struggles and nation-building efforts thereafter has been Uhuru na Umoja. These are Swahili words to mean freedom and unity. And that's why you see that in the coat of arms of Tanzania, Uhuru na Umoja. Beautifully, we have the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro there, flanked by a man and a woman, and the goldy yellow color for natural resources, green for agriculture, the basis of our economy there, black for the color of the skin of indigenous people there, and the blue for the great water resources that we have in the ocean, lakes and rivers. So, this legacy encouraged people to identify themselves as one big group of Tanganyikans or later Tanzanians, and nothing else. Because if you allow them to identify as Sukumas, Chagas, Hayas, so we'll have 120 or 130 different identities in the country. And we would not like that. We avoided that, and most of our neighbors did not. So it is out of this legacy that the minority Asians and the Europeans were made to remain an intimate part of the community and government, as opposed to episodes of the expulsion in some of our neighbors. This happened in Uganda, for example, in 1972. Uganda had expelled Asians from the country because they are not part of theirs. Tanzania said no. Everybody is part of Tanzania because we identify ourselves as Tanzanians and nothing else. So you will see the first cabinet of Tanzania after 1961 independence had the whites and the Asians as part of the cabinet because of that legacy, because we saw that at least the governing people, this man here, this is Nyerere, saw it in the very beginning that we have to eradicate these differences if we have to survive as a good nation in the future. But there have been scientific arguments that add up to what we see today. That unlike Tanzanian neighbors, Tanzania lacks an excessively large ethnic group that predominates the rest. Because that has been seen, at least in the scientific analysis, to be a very profound source of friction, where you have an excessively large group that predominates the rest. There is that superiority complex, where this group starts to think it is the best and to dominate everything, the politics, the business, or anything that is important for the development of the nation than the rest. Tanzania is lacking that. And that is how those who analyze it scientifically will tell. That is why you see in Tanzania you have only 13% of the Sukumas that make the largest proportion. If you compare that to Rwanda, 85% are Hutus and only 14% Tutsis, and the remaining 1% is the rest. Or you compare that to Burundi, the same case, a relatively large group in Kenya. So they have kept arguing that it is this reason that is also contributing. Another thing would be the growing culture of free and fair elections that would help to build a nice democracy where people live in harmony, in understanding of each other, and in respecting the dignity of everyone. We have gone through a period of one-party politics, and that was a blunder in my judgment. But the country was brave enough to embrace multipartyism in 1992. And since then, we have had very nice elections, to describe them, that have been free and fair. Of course, that is not without grievances. We have had protesters like everywhere in the world when elections come. So this is the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi and opposition rallies in one of the episodes of election campaigns. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those 5 major points were making the case as to why Tanzania is escaping, at least for now, the inter-ethnic violence. But we have problems, threats, or taints that would threaten that status in the future. First would be poverty. Despite the fact that Tanzania is endowed with a diverse assortment of natural resources, we have these tourism flashpoints, the Mount Kilimanjaro, which is very famous. It is the highest point in Africa, the highest point in a freestanding mountain in the world. There is no point that is as high as Mount Kilimanjaro, the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in this world, on a singly standing mountain. We have the rest on mountain ranges like Everest. But if you want to find the highest point on a singly standing mountain, you must go to Kilimanjaro, not otherwise. We have the Great Serengeti and a number of others. On the fisheries and other maritime services, we have extensive coastline. We are home to the largest tropical lake Victoria, home to world's second deepest lake, in fact, second largest freshwater lake by volume, Lake Tanganyika, and many other small lakes. So we have great potential in fisheries and maritime services. But why are we poor? Agricultural potential, around 40% of our total land area is arable. It's a land that can be turned into agricultural production. But sadly so, only 24% of that arable land is now under current exploitation. Hugely underexploited potential. Mining and other natural resources, gold, diamond, tanzanite. This is a jewelry that is found only in Tanzania, not anywhere else in this world. We have such resources. But why is Tanzania one of the poorest countries on earth? Today, I do not seek to answer that question, ladies and gentlemen. But the point I'm trying to make is poverty may potentially be a source of conflicts that will eventually tear the community apart and flip over into some form of violence in the future. Some more, we have increasing tension between farmers and livestock herders. There has been sporadic violence fueled by friction's need for grazing and farming land. We have growing elements of religious extremism, exemplified by explosion at a Christian religious event in Arusha, very recent, last May. These are issues that Tanzania needs to address if it has to remain as an example. That killings of the elderly accused of witchery, mostly around Lake Zone, and of course we have had a crackdown by the government that is working. It has seen decreasing trends in those incidences. We have had related killings of albinos for similar reasons. Of course, the government is working on that. And issues
on albinos. The term is not popular to us.
Wow. I'm very sorry. Albinos are handicapped people that lack the necessary skills skin pigmentation, the melanin pigment. And therefore they are very prone to sunshine and related affairs. At least to a layman's language that would be the case. But it is very much related, it is very troublesome. Their skin will be pale because the melanin pigment is not with them. So an African albino would look as white as nothing, probably compared to people in Europe. Not because they're Europeans, because they lack the melanin pigment. And the melanin pigment is important for the skin to be able to withstand sunshine and other toxic radiations. At least I'll go to that level. Now, those people have been a focus of attacks related to witch doctors who tell people that if you bring here the heart of an albino, I will make you a billionaire tomorrow. Such kind of beliefs that are gone to the killing of those people. And we have had issues of the union, and the last point there, that the union is having a number of issues that make one part of the union unhappy. And this part is the Zanzibar part. But again, the government seems to be on course to resolve those differences. But these are points that I wanted to make, that unless they are addressed seriously, then that phrase of Tanzania remaining an exemplary society in East Africa may well be into shelves in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, I would thank you for attentive listening, and good afternoon once again.